Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy will not be shown tonight in order to bring you the following special program. Now, the Democratic primary debate for the Massachusetts Special Senate election with candidates Stephen Lynch and Edward Markey. And now, here's Barry Krieger.
Good evening. We are 7 days away from the April 30th primary elections, where both Republicans and Democrats will choose their candidate to be on the ballot for the June 25th special election to choose someone to finish the Senate term of now Secretary of State John Kerry. Last month, we brought you the Springfield debate of the three Republicans vying for the U.S. Senate seat. Tonight, we hear from the Democrats. The debate was to take place last week, but all of the candidates suspended their campaigns, and the Democrats agreed to postpone their Springfield debate because of the Boston Marathon bombings. Here's tonight's moderator, WGBY's Jim Madigan.
Good evening. Welcome to WGBY TV in Springfield for a debate between the candidates for the Democratic nomination for the United States Senate. The candidates are Stephen Lynch and Edward Markey. I'm Jim Madigan of WGBY Public Television. I will be your moderator. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer questions, then 30 seconds for any further comment or rebuttal. We will end with 2-minute closing statements. The Western Massachusetts Media Consortium invited the public to suggest questions, and that's where a great many of the questions I will ask tonight originated. Before we begin, in view of the events of the past week, to honor those lost and injured in Boston, let us observe a brief period of silence. Thank you. Let us now begin our debate. The speaking order was determined by a flip of a coin. The first question goes first to Congressman Lynch. Mr. Lynch, tell us why you think your record is stronger and better than your opponents on issues of national security and fighting terrorism.
Well, thank you, Jim. And first of all, I want to thank the Western Media Consortium for allowing us to come here tonight and to have this wonderful forum. I want to thank my colleague Ed Markey for his willingness to participate in this debate. And I do want to acknowledge that we have had a long and difficult week. The attacks on April 15th were not just on the city of Boston or on the marathon itself, but upon our Commonwealth and our country and our democracy. And I do want to acknowledge that from Longmeadow, young Ryan McMahon was severely injured. She is recovering, and we wish her well. Our condolences go out to all of the victims and their families, and special thanks to the Holyoke Canine Unit that rushed to the scene and offered instrumental assistance on that day. Why I think I am best qualified or have the strongest record on issues of national security is because of my voting record. Unlike my colleague, Mr. Markey, I've actually voted for the Department of Homeland Security appropriations bills. Mr. Markey, in contrast, has voted against the Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill in 2003, 2004, 2006, 2007, and 2011. And I'm not sure why. But I know on most of those votes, it was fairly unanimous, with only nine members voting against on some of those bills, but the great majority of members of the United States House of Representatives, both Republican and Democrat, voting for that. I voted for the creation of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which Mr. Markey voted against, and voted for the port security bill that provided great port security for the entire country, which all major port representatives voted for, including those in New York City, which saw the highest damage from September 11th.
That is time served. I think we went maybe 5 seconds, so we'll allow the same amount of time. Mr. Markey, your record on issues of national security.
Thank you. Thank you to Springfield for hosting us. Steve and I appreciate it. And thanks to everyone out there. This has been an incredible week for our state, but it's been a week not just of tragedy, but also of triumph. Not just the victims, but also those who rushed to help those victims. And I think we're all very proud of our state this week. You know, Steve did this last night, and he's done it again this evening. He's just taken a page right out of the Karl Rove swift boat
I took the
playbook.
page out of your
Your
voting
please don't interrupt me, Steve. I
Okay.
did not interrupt you.
I'm
Please
sorry,
do-
go ahead. Go
Please
ahead.
do not interrupt me.
Okay, sorry.
He's taken a page right out of the Karl Rove Swift Boat playbook. And it's very sad, especially just 1 week after what just happened in Boston and Cambridge and Watertown. I voted to make sure that our country was protected. I made sure that we would have the issue of screening for cargo on planes right underneath the feet of passengers who had already had their own shoes taken off, was screened for bombs. That's what Mohammed Atta and the other 9 would try to exploit. I made sure that we would have a screening for nuclear weapons on ships coming into our country. I voted no every time there was a Homeland Security bill that did not ensure that we screened for bombs on passenger planes. I voted no every time there was a bill that did not screen for nuclear weapons that could come in to the port of Boston. Yes, I did vote no, because my job is to ensure the Homeland Security of our country. And Steve last night and again this evening, he said that I voted against the creation of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Well, just so you know, every single member of our delegation but Steve voted no on the provision that would create that terrorism task force, but at the expense of bringing the military to the streets of our country for the first time in our history.
That's time,
and then
Congressman, please.
on the final passage of the bill, Steve voted
Reclaiming
no
my time
on the
if I
final
could.
passage of the bill.
It's time, sir.
All right.
You have an additional 30 seconds.
Well, look, I don't know how you say you support things. The bill you voted against, not only did I have $148 million in there for rapid transit protection that you voted against, but also there was $536 million to establish the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office. We were setting it up. You voted against that. And again, you voted against 2003, 2006, 2007, 2011. I didn't take the page from Karl Rove's playbook. I took the page from your voting record. That's where this page came from. And on a lot of these votes, not only was it the entire mass delegation voting with me, with the first responders, but most of the members of Congress. In some of these cases, it was 417 votes for.
Lynch, that's time,
Okay.
sir. Thank you very much. We allowed the congressman a little more time to make up for your extra time before. You have 30 now, sir.
Listen, again, let's just go back to it. Every member of our delegation, including Richie Neal, John Over, and Jim McGovern, sided with me on the Joint Terrorism Task Force against Steve. Steve was the outlier on that vote, just so everyone out here in Western Massachusetts knows which side I was on. And on the question of his bill with his port security, let me just tell you, that bill did not screen for nuclear weapons in the port of Boston. That bill did not screen to make sure that there was no bombs on planes taking off from Logan Airport. That is why I voted no, to make sure that the next Mohammed Atta could not create the same kind of tragedy.
That's time, sir. I think we're about even, so let's go on to our next question. Somewhat in the same vein, do you agree with the public safety exception in the law regarding questioning of terrorist suspects, such as Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, allowing for their interrogation without initially being informed of Miranda rights to remain silent, to have an attorney? There are those who are concerned this may be cited as a technicality in his trial and may perhaps prevent full prosecution. Mr. Markey, you first with 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think that we have to give a great weight to the decision made by President Obama and his Justice Department. I think that it's important for them to be able to act in a way that could deal with any imminent threat to our country. And I think that their wisdom is something that will not be second-guessed by me. I heard President Obama last week in Boston. I was in church when he delivered his statement to our Commonwealth. And he said that he had Boston in his heart. And I think that he made the correct decision in making sure that first we made sure there was no additional imminent threat to our state. And I think that I agree with the decision which he made, and I would not second guess it.
You still have additional time, sir, if you wish.
I'm fine.
But, all right, very good. Mr. Lynch, you have up to 2 minutes.
I absolutely agree with the limited opportunity in these type of cases where we are not sure the remaining risk beyond the capture of the principal suspects. If you remember, Jim, after the initial bombing on the 15th, both of these suspects went to other locations. At the time that they were met with in Watertown, they had, I believe, several of those pressure cooker bombs with them. They had several hand grenades with them. There were weapons at other locations. So I think under the circumstances, this type of operation, it was absolutely appropriate for law enforcement to suspend the Miranda warnings and to make sure that there weren't others involved here, as well as other bomb placements that might have been elsewhere, across the city. So I certainly support what they did. I do want to go back, though. I do want to say that on several of the votes where Mr. Markey voted against Department of Homeland Security, he was one of 2 votes in one case. He was one of 9 votes with 420 members of Congress representing ports, and the title of the bill was, and the substance of the bill was, port security, cargo security. So this was directly to the points that Mr. Markey is trying to defend, but actually he voted against the bills, the appropriations bills, voted against the creation of those, and on the vast majority of those bills, the entire Massachusetts delegation was on our side. Not only the Mass delegation, but almost every Democrat, almost every Republican in Congress. This was after 9/11. When the risk was the greatest. This was the time when we had to step up. So it is mystifying how Mr. Markey can now say that he's a champion of Homeland Security when he didn't fund our first responders.
Thank you, Mr. Markey. You have 30 seconds.
Again, it might have been called a port security bill, but it did not screen for nuclear weapons on the boats coming into Boston Harbor, Steve. Calling something a Homeland Security bill does not mean it protects Homeland Security. When I voted no because the greatest threat to our country is Al-Qaeda getting their hands on nuclear materials, putting it on a ship, bringing it into Boston Harbor, and then detonating it on the boat. That's why I voted no. And by the way, on the bill that created the Joint Terrorism Task Force, you voted no on the final bill on the House floor. You voted no, and I voted no on that bill, Steve, in 2002. There was no difference between us on the final passage of the bill. So you should just get the record straight, Steve, before you start mischaracterizing my own.
Time, sir. We'll allow you to make everything even 50 seconds now up to that, Mr. Lynch.
Please, this is fiction time here. Your record is quite clear on this, Ed. Your record is quite clear on this. You voted against it repeatedly, and look, you're so far out on the left, it's ridiculous that even basic stuff like offering condolences to the families after 9/11. I mean, a simple act like that, voting to offer condolences to the families, offering something like that. There's a repeated effort on your side on the basic decent issues here. I know you get hung up on policy, but sometimes when we're funding our first responders, it's about the people. It's about giving them the equipment, giving them the resource that they need to do their job. And I can't understand how every single congressman representing a port in America today voted for the bill, but you're saying they were all wrong, that I was wrong.
That's time, Congressman Lynch. Thank you very much.
Jim,
we'll let you each have a little bit more on this one. Go ahead.
I have to be able to follow up on this, Jim. Look, on the resolution that he says I did not vote for, you know what that resolution said? That resolution said that because of 9/11, because of what happened in Boston and New York, we had to invade Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what the resolution said. Now, I personally don't believe that that was a rationale for invading those 2 countries. And I felt that it was a wrong vote. If we wanted to just praise those who had served our country, that's what the resolution should have said. And I would have voted for that. But there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And that's what that resolution said. And I could not become a part of a deception that the Republicans, in bringing that resolution out on the floor, would serve as a blank check for George Bush to continue to conduct that war on the basis of what happened on 9/11, because that was completely untrue.
All right, sir, that was a minute, so we'll allow you a minute.
All right. It was a sense of Congress resolution. It had no operative impact in terms. It was just a resolution to offer condolence to the victims and the victims' families. That's all there was to it.
It was a lot more than
and again, that vote had over 400 members of Congress as well, Democrats and Republicans, and I believe all of the Mass delegation as well. But you know, again, you can have someone who's going to get hung up on policy, but I actually think that in the aftermath of September 11th, in a simple resolution, a sense of Congress, to offer condolences to the victims of those families, it was about the people. It was about trying to lessen the blow to those families, to offer a demonstration of kindness and respect to those families. And I think it was more than policy. It really was about people.
That's a minute, Mr. Lynch. I think we've gone over this pretty well, gentlemen, so go to the next question, which will go first to Mr. Lynch. Before the terrible events in Boston last week, we were spending an awful lot of our time thinking about North Korea. Are we doing enough, as best we know, as best we can tell, to respond to and defend our country and our allies who are much closer to Korea? Are we doing enough to protect against the threats that have been made by North Korea? 2 minutes.
I do think we are, and I want to congratulate former Senator Kerry, now Secretary of State Kerry, for his work there. I was in South Korea recently, had a chance to go up to the DMZ and meet with our South Korean counterparts and meet with our military leaders. We need to really bring the international community together, though. We need to bring China into the picture as well. We need to make sure that Russia and China, especially as being countries that are immediately affected by whatever goes on in North Korea, we have to make sure that they don't feel like their security positions are diminished because of actions that we're taking. I think the president has been very prudent in moving some of those radar detective systems closer in, just in case this new leader, Kim Jong-un, is highly unpredictable. I think he's trying to follow somewhat in the steps of his father and his grandfather, which is troubling. But I also think we have friends in that region, like Japan and South Korea, that we have to reassure. There has been repeated shows of recklessness and belligerence on the part of the North Korean government that should give us pause. But I think that look, I serve as a co-chair of the task force on terrorist financing and non-proliferation. Peter King is my Republican co-chair, and I think caution, but backing up that caution with proper preparation is the way for the United States to proceed. And always remembering that we are greatest in that region when we collaborate with our international partners, and we have the good faith of those international alliances behind us.
That is time, sir. Mr. Markey, 2 minutes.
Thank you. We're very fortunate to have John Kerry as our Secretary of State at this very perilous time. And I'm very impressed by the work which he has been doing over the last couple of months. Because everything he is doing is obviously carefully calibrated to elicit specific responses from the North Koreans. There was a policy mistake made years ago that thought that we could sell nuclear power plants to North Korea or Iran or Iraq and not reap the whirlwind years later as they converted these programs into nuclear weapons programs rather than into the generation of electricity. And now what John Kerry is doing, I think, is very wise. He is saying to the South Koreans, we've got your back. We'll be there. We're going to stand by your side. We're not going to allow a sociopathic leader of North Korea to hold the whole world hostage and to potentially jeopardize the very existence of South Korea. And he's sending a very strong message to that effect. And it's a message that must be heard, that the United States will not allow these sociopathic leaders that have nuclear weapons in their hands to hold the whole world hostage. And so this alliance that John Kerry is putting together, China And China has to be more aggressive. China has never been as aggressive as it should be. North Korea is completely dependent upon China for their resources. We have to continue to pressure China so that they, in turn, put the pressure on North Korea. But then the rest of the countries in our coalition, all letting not just North Korea, but any other country in the world that would help North Korea, that we are going to ostracize them. That is the only way, ultimately, in which we are going to squeeze him so tight that he would not dare to ever use a nuclear weapon against us or any other country in the world.
It's time, sir. Mr. Lynch, an additional 30 seconds on this topic?
No, thank you. I'll just let it go.
You also have an additional under the form. All right, we'll move on to our next question, which goes first in this case to Mr. Markey. Still in the area of international policy, how far should the United States be prepared to go to prevent the nation of Iran from developing nuclear weapons?
The question of nuclear nonproliferation should always be made paramount. We know that if the Iranians were able to gain access to a nuclear weapon and they had the capacity to use it, that Tel Aviv would be a target, that New York City, Boston, Washington could be a target. That is a real danger to us. And in the same way that John Kerry is doing an excellent job on North Korea, it's the same issue. It's the residuum of the sale of civilian nuclear power plants into the hands of regimes that then convert them over to nuclear weapons programs. And we cannot tolerate Iran having that weapons program. And so we must build a coalition, and we have done that, to impose the strongest possible sanctions in the history of the world, to squeeze that regime, to let them know that their commerce, let them know that their relationship with the rest of the world is completely dependent upon them relinquishing any ambition to, in fact, obtain a nuclear weapon. We must say to Ahmadinejad and to the Ayatollah that we are not going to tolerate you having a nuclear weapon. And I think that message is being sent strongly and repeatedly by President Obama, by Secretary of State John Kerry, and it is one that I think we all have to stand behind, because we do not want to know what the consequences of a weapon in their hands would mean for the security of the Middle East or for the planet.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you. I don't think there's a lot of difference between Ed and I on this. I do think that China and Russia have enormous influence in this area as well. There are, European Union interests. Turkey as well has emerged as a player in that region. I think there's a two-way system here. Not only what Ed has spoken to, which is to try to put pressure on Iran in terms of creating disincentives to the regime there, to dissuade them from their pursuit of nuclear weapons. But I think there's also an affirmative step that we can take to protect Israel's position. Israel is the only true democracy in that region, and they have been a long and strong partner of the United States. I do think, look, Israel's not perfect, but neither are we, and certainly, I think there are policy differences sometimes between our two countries. But I also know there's a lot of love for Israel and for the people of Israel here in the United States, and I think that they are in a vulnerable position right now, and there are radar systems, there are alliances that we can bring in to firm up their position in the Middle East. We've got to do everything we can to make sure that, yes, as Ed has said, to dissuade the Iranian regime from pursuing nuclear weapons, but also we have to create the consequences for Iran if they dare try to take that step.
That's time, sir. Mr. Markey, you have an additional 30 seconds in this topic.
When Israel attacked Iraq in 1981 and destroyed their nuclear power plant, Osirak, outside of Baghdad, they were condemned by the world, including the Reagan administration. I said that Menachem Begin deserved the Nobel Peace Prize because that was the beginning of a clandestine nuclear weapons program. If Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran put down their weapons, there would be peace. If Israel put down their weapons, there would be no more Israel. And we just have to make sure that we have Israel's back on this, that there's nothing that separates us, that we do protect them against this threat that Iran poses through all of these other finger relationships into the Middle East that they fund Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorist groups.
It's time. I believe that was 55 seconds, so you can have up to that amount of time, Mr. Lynch, for further comment.
Well, thank you. I know we're talking about Iran, but I've spent a lot of time in Pakistan over the last 10 years, and Pakistan is also a nuclear power. And it has I think at best it could be described as a shaky regime there now. We're at a point again where the civilian leadership there in Pakistan is unstable right now. It seems like the military in Pakistan is still the player to be dealt with in a meaningful way. But I think we need to have a wider perspective on how we approach non-proliferation in that region. I would not want our entire focus just to be on Iran.
Sure.
I think also that Pakistan is a troubling development.
Time, sir. Thank you very much. That worked out exactly right. Thank you both. Let's move into domestic policy. You both said you oppose President Obama's budget proposals that would change the way COLA, cost of living adjustments, are figured, result in about $130 billion estimated cut Social Security and other benefit programs over 10 years. They are such a large part of federal spending. Don't Social Security and Medicare, don't entitlements have to be on the table if the deficit is to be reduced? First to Mr. Lynch, 2 minutes, sir.
With respect to Social Security, no. Social Security does not contribute to the deficit. And that's what the proposal in the budget tries to do, bring the budget back into balance. Look, Social Security right now is desperately needed by more and more seniors in this country. Over half of the seniors in this country, close to 60%, rely on Social Security for most of what they earn in retirement. So, look, I even opposed the payroll tax cut because we were fearful that it was going to drain money. Payroll tax funds Social Security. If you stop paying the payroll tax, you actually stop funding Social Security. And that's what FDR was afraid of. He didn't want, he wanted Americans to pay into their own Social Security. And his words, these were his words, not mine. He said, I want the American people to pay into Social Security because that way, these were his words, not mine, no damn politician will ever touch that. And no American citizen will ever allow a politician to touch that. And so when we stopped paying in and we said, we're going to try to pay for this in some other way and not have people pay in, I voted against that twice on the floor. It still passed, and I forget how Ed voted, but I'm sure he'll remind us. But we don't need to revamp Social Security. We just need to tweak it a little bit. And one of the things we do right now is we only tax Social Security in the first $113,000 that everybody earns. So somebody like A-Rod that makes $40 million this year, he pays well, let's put it this way: somebody who earns $40,000 a year pays 100% of their salary towards Social Security. A-Rod probably does it in the first week of the season, and so we got to change that. We got to make sure that everybody contributes to the same degree that they can.
It's time, sir. You have 2 minutes on the same topic, Mr. Markey.
Thank you. They're called entitlements, but people have contributed to those programs throughout their entire life. And the Republicans want us to forget. They want us to have amnesia the way they do. They have selective amnesia because they want us to forget that a big part of this deficit was caused by 2 tax cuts that the Bush administration and the Republicans put on the books, 2 wars that they fought without paying for them, setting up a casino on Wall Street with the regulators turning a blind eye that led to derivatives and credit default swaps, ultimately leading to a collapse of our economy that could only be saved if the Democrats were willing to cast the votes to save the country from this terrible Republican policies. No, Social Security is solvent until the year 2033. What the Republicans want to ignore is that there are other entitlements they don't want to talk about. The oil companies think they're entitled to $40 billion worth of tax breaks, even as they tip us upside down at the gas station every week. Richie Neal, he leads the fight to take away $500 billion worth of tax breaks for corporations that send jobs offshore and use the Caribbean islands as the way to do that. The Defense Department wants another $100 billion worth of new nuclear weapons programs, which aren't needed and we can't afford. $80 billion for NATO burden sharing, where, in fact, the likelihood of Russia invading Germany and France is -0. That's where we should be looking. Let's look to the entitlements that the rest of the Republican constituencies think that they have to protect before we look at the poor and the sick and the elderly who had nothing to do with the collapse of the economy, this recession that we're living in, this casino that was set up on Wall Street. Let's make sure that we put out on the table those things which have been draining revenues undeservedly for a generation.
That's time, sir. And each gets another 30 seconds. And Mr. Lynch on the same area.
Sure. I do want to remind everybody out there, especially the general election voters, that not a very long time ago, the Republicans were actually trying to privatize Social Security. Back when the stock market was going straight up before the drop, there was a big push on the part of George Bush and the Republican leadership to privatize Social Security, to take a big chunk of Social Security and put it on the stock market, because they said, since the market's going straight up, this is a sure bet. I'm very proud of Ed and myself and the Democrats for putting a stop to that. It was a joint effort by us all, and if we had not done that, when that stock market went in the toilet in 2007, we would have lost a lot of income for every single senior citizen in this country.
All right, sir, that's time. We allowed you 50 seconds, so up to that same amount of time, Mr. Markey.
Again, we do have to deal with the deficit. But this ancient animosity which the Republicans have towards Medicare and Social Security, programs that they voted against at the point of their origination, is something that we have to take note of. Paul Ryan and his budget just 4 weeks ago on the House floor once again voted successfully to turn Medicare into a voucher, which would have harmed seniors seriously and in a way that would have hurt their health. In the same way that George Bush attempted to privatize Social Security. This is still the ambition which these Republicans harbor against these programs. You cannot negotiate with people who do not actually believe in the existence of the programs that we're talking about saving.
That's time. Thank you, sir. Unemployment remains a serious problem statewide, serious concern. But it is just a little bit worse here in Western Massachusetts, especially in our inner cities. Do you have any specific ideas on what you might be able to do as a senator to improve the economy and the jobs situation in this part of the Commonwealth in particular? And first to Mr. Markey, 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. I think it's important for us to complete the Boston to Springfield rail line. I think that's a real job creator, brings jobs out here to Western Mass, creates a much more attractive place for businesses to locate. And I'm going to work, if I am a senator, with President Obama to create a manufacturing hub out here in Western Massachusetts. He's talking about setting these things up nationally. I think Western Massachusetts would be the ideal location. Similarly, when it comes to broadband, we have to be realistic about what is needed out in a more rural part, less populated part of the Commonwealth. And in the 2009 stimulus bill, I worked to include billions of dollars for broadband for rural America. And out here in Western Massachusetts, it has now qualified for $45 million out of that broadband bill to help to connect all of the cities and towns, all the libraries and schools, and ultimately each one of the residences and businesses as well. And I'm very proud of that as well. And in addition, I think University of Massachusetts and the other community colleges, they're a part of what it is that makes Western Mass very, very special. And we have to make sure that funding continues for research that will really help to create jobs as well. So for me, I would just throw in one other thing, and I think that's a pathway to citizenship for the immigrants in our state, a legal pathway, so that we can take advantage of the talents of all of these people who are already working out here and give them the confidence that they are going to be full participants in the 21st century of the growth of the Western Massachusetts economy.
Very good, sir. Mr. Lynch, 2 minutes.
Sure. I think the best thing we could do is to repeal NAFTA. I remember as an iron worker standing with a picket sign outside of the Sheraton Hotel when the big business owners were telling us, and my colleague Ed Markey were telling us that NAFTA is going to be a great thing. It's going to create all kinds of jobs in the United States. We're going to treat Mexico as a state, and don't worry about the jobs. They won't take many jobs. Well, here we are these many years later, and if there's any area of this state that's been adversely impacted by NAFTA, it's right here in Springfield. And I would say from Worcester on west to Pittsfield, we have lost more manufacturing jobs, you know, and you can thank Ed Markey for that. Those were millions of jobs, good paying jobs, decent jobs that our kids could be stepping into right now, and I think it's a shame. You know, I worked for a while at the General Motors plant in Framingham, Massachusetts. Great job. There were 2,400 workers there. And I saw what happened to that region and those workers when Ed voted for NAFTA and those jobs went away. And it's a shame. Secondly, I just want to talk about the telecommunications bill. Happened in 1996. And the promise that Ed made was it's going to create 1.5 million jobs. We lost 500,000 jobs as a result of the Telecommunications Act. And if you ask anybody in Western Mass about broadband, are you kidding me? You know, still got people out in Pittsfield that they're watching the Yankees tonight because they can't get the Red Sox station. There is no incentive for these telecommunications. It created two big monopolies, Verizon and Comcast. If you want choice from Comcast, you can either watch Comcast or you can go home and read a book. That's about the only choice you got, because that was a terrible bill. And I could go on, but I'm running out of time.
It's 2 minutes. Mr. Markey, I'm sure you want your 30 seconds.
Yes. Thank you. Well, look at President Clinton assured me that he was going to, in fact, enforce the labor and environmental safeguards. I was in the Oval Office with Bill Clinton. He gave me his assurances. And what he couldn't assure me was that President Bush would also do so. So that was a mistake. And we underestimated his desire to, in fact, enforce those laws. On the auto industry, Steve voted against TARP, which bailed out the auto industry, saved 1.5 million jobs, including 97,000 auto jobs here in the state of Massachusetts. Steve voted against that bill. That's the only way the auto industry.
I'll get my time later.
That is the only way the auto industry even exists today, and Steve voted no on the bill that saved the auto industry just 3 years ago.
On my time?
We allowed you a little extra time, so we'll be even. I think it's about 45 seconds. Go ahead, sir.
All right. I don't want to call you a liar, but but you are. Look, let me just say, the TARP bill was separate. We had a separate bill later on for the auto industry. I took a lot of heat for voting for the bailout of the auto industry, and that was because that was our industry. That was actually saving manufacturing jobs. And TARP, you voted to save the banks. That's what you did. You voted to save the shareholders of the banks. And, you know, that was a disgrace, because I have people in my own district that don't even have a bank account. And Ed took their money to give to the big bankers. They paid themselves bonus. It was great for Goldman Sachs and your friends on Wall Street, but it was terrible for American families and for homeowners. And, you know, I think that's something you should be ashamed of.
Jim,
that's time there, and I'm yes, take some
because,
additional time. Go ahead.
I think Steve was inappropriately personally insulting, and I just don't think it's proper in this kind of a discussion to act in that way. Look at Steve voted against the bill to bail out the auto industry. That's all there is to it. That's why the United Auto Workers have endorsed me in this campaign and not endorsed Steve, because I cast the vote to save the auto industry, and Steve voted against the bill to save the auto industry. And that's just 3 years ago, Steve. And you might want to create your own facts here, but you can't create your own truth. That's the reality of the vote that we had to cast in Congress.
It was 45 seconds, so to be even, you can have
no,
that.
We can have fact checkers. I'm sure there are people doing that already. But no, the bank bailout was different. The TARP bill was different. It didn't include the auto bill. That came later on. But and you're wrong, Ed. Look, if you really believe that, I take it back. You're not a liar. You're just misinformed. But I am right about the fact that, you know, when the time came to stand with the regular people, with the citizens, with the taxpayers, you stepped up, but you stepped up for the big banks in Wall Street, and you bailed them out to the tune of $787 billion and allowed them to pay each other bonuses for the disaster that they created.
Honestly.
I think we've gone over the ground, gentlemen. Thanks. Next question.
He is incorrigible here, though. He's not stopping, okay, in terms of the mistruths he's stating. But
all right, that was 10 seconds. You want final? We try to keep it as even as we can.
No, I understand that. No, he's just wrong. We just have a disagreement.
All right. All right, thank you both, gentlemen. This next question will go first to Mr. Lynch, and I don't know what this says, but we had a lot of viewers and readers wanted us to ask you about marijuana policy. Last November, Massachusetts, of course, approved medicinal marijuana. The program expected to take effect later this year, early next year, perhaps. The question is, as best I could boil them down from all of the ones that came in, if you go to the Senate, would you support or would you try to work with the Justice Department in terms of their continued opposition to medicinal marijuana laws at the state level? Where would you stand, Mr. Lynch?
Well, I might lose some votes here, but I have to be completely honest. I thought the legalization of medicinal marijuana here in Massachusetts was a terrible decision. I work in the recovery community quite a bit. I established, helped establish the Cushing House for Boys, residential program for adolescents in South Boston. Following we had a cluster suicide where we lost 14 young men who took their own lives over about an 18-month period. And one of the things that we used to address that was creating the Cushing House, a residential facility for young men. A couple of years later, we created a similar home, the Cushing House for Girls, that actually takes young people in. We get them straightened out. If they need to be back in school, we get them back in school. If they need to be back to work, we put them in work, but we try to guide them on a good path. I spend a lot of time working on people in recovery. And, you know, I work a lot with addicts. And I'm not saying that every kid that picks up a joint, look, I smoked dope when I was a kid, smoked marijuana. I'm not saying that every kid that picks up a joint of marijuana becomes a heroin addict, but I have to say that in meeting and talking with a lot of addicts, I have not met an addict that did not start with marijuana, not yet. And I just think we're lowering the barriers. I understand there's medicinal value there, but you know, could we make a pill form or something like that? Because I just think that we are going to spend billions on rehab because of what we're doing now on marijuana.
That's time, sir. Mr. Markey, 2 minutes, federal versus state policy on marijuana.
Thank you. Well, I supported the referendum in Massachusetts. I think that medicinal marijuana makes sense. I think that as long as the standards are put in place that stringently protect against abuse of this medicinal marijuana exception, then it's a sound policy. There are people who have cancer. There are people who have other very serious diseases who clearly need help. As long as a physician acting properly is prescribing medicinal marijuana, that in the judgment of the physician is in the best interest of the patient, then I think it makes sense. The dispensaries for medicinal marijuana that are constructed across this state, they have to be very carefully, rigidly regulated to make sure that it does not turn into a common dispensation of this drug onto the streets of the Commonwealth. And I think it's important for us to work with the federal government to ensure that they respect what it is that we are doing here in Massachusetts, that they not prosecute people under federal law for what it is that we have decided to create as a program here to help patients who need patients, who are in a state that a physician would recommend this kind of help. And so for me, I would hope that the federal government would give deference to what it is that we are doing here in the state of Massachusetts, and I would hope that we would do so in a way that would really help the people who really need this as an aid for their chronic illnesses.
That is time, sir. You have an additional 30 seconds.
Sure. You know, I understand those arguments, Ed, and I don't say that they're not thoughtful and well intended. But what we've seen, we're on uncharted territory in Massachusetts with this bill. But if you look at what's happening in Colorado, you know, the average patient under doctor's care for medical marijuana is between the ages of 18 and white male between the ages of 18 and 25. The most common afflictions are anxiety and migraine headaches. So the evidence is not good.
That's time, sir, and you have 30 seconds more if you wish.
Again, Massachusetts has set very stringent guidelines. We have to make sure that this is given to those people who need it. And we start with cancer, and we create a whole cluster of diseases, which we know many physicians believe that marijuana could be helpful. And I do believe that if the program is carefully constructed, monitored, that we can do it in a way that is consistent with what the overwhelming majority of people in Massachusetts feel makes sense for those people who are sick.
Time, sir. And this question will go first to Mr. Markey. Congressman, you've criticized your opponent's vote against the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare as it's called. He says he cast that vote because the plan didn't do enough to address health care costs. Since cost containment was so much a part of what that legislation was supposed to be about, wasn't his decision on that bill understandable, reasonable, easy to explain?
No, we had worked for generations, from Harry Truman through Ted Kennedy, our great hero, through Barack Obama, to put on the books a law that would ensure that every child in America had health insurance, that ensured that if you had a pre-existing condition that you could not be denied coverage, that if you were a woman, that was no longer a pre-existing condition, that you had to pay more, that if you became sick, you did not become bankrupt. And that was 2/3 of all personal bankruptcies in the United States 3 years ago. Just having a disease ultimately led to personal bankruptcies in 2/3 of all cases. And so, no, that was the proudest vote of my career. Now, here in Massachusetts right now, there is an effort to put together a model for cost containment as well. So in the same way that we led on the issue of ensuring that there was universal access, that people could not be denied health insurance, we're now the leader in putting together a model for cost containment as well. But on the issue of whether or not the law was going to be put on the books in the first place, back 3 years ago, our whole delegation voted for that health care bill. President Obama was asking us for that vote. Vicki Kennedy was asking us for that vote. John Kerry supported that vote. When Steve was needed most, he did not stand up for the health care needs of the people in this state. Yes, we now have to find a way of ensuring that we protect against rapidly escalating health care costs, but we could not deny universal health care insurance to every child in our country. We could not deny people the ability to know that no longer would health care be a privilege, but now be a right for every citizen in our country.
It's time, sir. You have 2 minutes, Mr. Lynch.
Sure, thank you. I just want to bring everybody back to a similar challenge for President Clinton. He was trying to get welfare reform done, and he put the bill out there, and Newt Gingrich and his guys, messed it up and sent him back a bill that really didn't serve the needs of the people that he was intending to help. So he vetoed it and sent it back. And they tried it again, same group. Gingrich, made changes in the bill, made it, punitive rather than helpful. And Clinton vetoed it again. And then the third time, the Republicans gave up and gave him the bill he wanted, and he signed it into law. We had the same problem with the health care bill, except we gave up. We didn't send it back. Here's the three things that were wrong with the health care bill. One, it established an antitrust exemption for insurance companies that allows them to act as monopolies with no competition. Secondly, our efforts to create a public option which would allow states to offer low-cost plans, that was taken out of the bill. Thirdly, what the bill does now, it puts tax after tax after tax onto health care, so that now what we have in this country is employers are running away from their health care obligations. Good companies, even union plans that used to provide great health care, are now fearing that they might go out of business. Ed and others made a statement that everybody will be able to keep your own doctor. Well, we know that's true already. And as a matter of fact, I have several hospitals in my district. I'm not even sure we'll be able to keep our own hospitals. Here's the problem. In negotiating with the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies, what we wanted was broad, affordable health care at low cost. What they wanted 31 million new customers. We gave them everything we wanted, everything that they wanted, they got. Now, it's like we were a hostage situation, and we not only paid the ransom, we gave them the hostages too. We let them keep the hostages. Now, we have no leverage with them to lower prices. That's the problem. That's why prices continue to skyrocket.
And that's time, sir. Thank you. Mr. Markey, an additional, actually 40 seconds if you wish to keep things even. Go ahead.
Yeah. Steve, you were the only member of our delegation that voted no.
I think I'm the only one that read the bill.
Excuse me, let me answer. You were the only one in our delegation that voted no on the health care bill. You were the only one out of step in ensuring that we put that health care bill on the books. In the same way that when you attacked me personally last night and tonight on an erroneous set of facts, you were out of line there as well. You were not, in fact, standing up for the needs of the health care of every citizen of Massachusetts and every citizen of our country. This was a dream of President Obama and Ted Kennedy for a generation. This is what the Democratic Party is all about. It's ensuring universal access to health care. We had one vote, one time.
Congressman,
you voted no, and I voted yes. That is the difference between us.
I have to be strict now, and I have 30 seconds left, and then we have to go right to closing statements. So
all right, thank you.
You have 30 seconds.
Let me just say, there wasn't just one vote. We had a House bill. The House bill took away the antitrust exemption from insurance companies. It did exactly what we wanted to do. The House bill introduced a statewide public option that allowed states to offer low-cost plans. We had a House bill that did not tax health care. It did not. I voted for that bill. So I wasn't against health care. I was for health care reform, real health care reform.
That's our time, sir. Right to closing statements. Toss of the coin, Mr. Lynch, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. Look, it would be an honor for me to represent the state of Massachusetts in the United States Senate. And I think that what you see here between the two of us, Ed is great on policy, I give him that. But I also think I'm great on people and great on being hands-on, a hands-on leader, whether it's fighting crime and drugs in the housing projects or fighting against the export of good U.S. jobs to Mexico and NAFTA, or whether fighting for Social Security on behalf of senior citizens, or any other issue or fighting for a decent broadband and telecommunication system out here in Western Mass. I've been there, and that type of leadership is what I take pride in. We have a very different situation with Ed and I. When it came to the bank bailout, Ed was there for the banks, and I was there for the regular citizens. When it came to supporting the fishermen, I was with the fishermen. Ed was with the fish. When it came to fighting against NAFTA, I was with American workers. That's where I was. And Ed was with the big corporations that wanted to ship the jobs down to Mexico. I know where I've stood, and I know why I stand there. I'm like a lot of people in Springfield. My family's like a lot of families in Springfield. You know, I strapped on a pair of work boots for 18 years. There won't be, when I look around Springfield, I don't see a lot of people that I think are reflected in the United States Senate. We got one good senator down there, Liz Warren. But I'll tell you what, she would be helped enormously by having an iron worker down there to give her a hand and work on behalf of the people of Massachusetts. I'd be honored to have you vote. And please, the best way to defend democracy is to participate. We need to get out and vote. Show those terrorists who's right. Get out and vote on the 30th. Thank you.
Time, sir. Thank you. 2 minutes, Mr. Markey.
Well, Steve says that he is a people guy and not a policy guy. So which people, Steve, were you standing up for when you voted against the health care bill and voted to deny every child in America health care? Who are you standing up for? When you voted against a woman's right to choose, who were you standing up for? When you voted for the sequester that is now cutting educational funds, Homeland Security funds, $3 billion worth of Homeland Security funds are going to be cut this year. Who are you standing up for when you cut all that Homeland Security money? Who are you standing up for when you did not vote for the auto bailout? Who are you standing up? Which people were you standing up for, Steve? I want to run for the United States Senate because I want to stand up for those ordinary families across our state. This has been a great adventure for me. I went up to Lawrence where Marcos Devers, Dominican-American state representative, endorsed me about 8 weeks ago at the Rios restaurant. And he brought about 150 of his Dominican supporters to that restaurant. And I stood up to tell a story that my father had grown up in Lawrence. My father, the fourth of 5 children on the first floor of a triple-decker on 88 Phillips Street in South Lawrence, ultimately a graduate of the vocational program at Lawrence High School. And I told him the story that after the 5th of those 5 children, my Aunt Margie passed away just 3 years ago. My wife and I went up and we rang the doorbell at 88 Phillips Street in South Lawrence, the first floor of a triple-decker, to see who lived there now. And the door opened and it was a Dominican family with their children. Different accents, but the same aspirations for their children. That is our job in this race, to make sure that this is a democratization of access to opportunity through education, through healthcare, through breaking down of discriminatory barriers. And I ask respectfully for your vote so I can go to make sure that the American dream is made accessible for every American.
That is time, sir. We want to quickly thank our candidates, Congressman Stephen Lynch, Congressman Edward Markey. Thank you to the Western Massachusetts Media Consortium for making this happen. Remember, vote next week, April 30th. Make this count. Thanks for watching. Good night from Springfield.
And we thank you for joining us here on 22 News digital channel, 22.2, and on our website at WWLP.com, where this Senate debate is being streamed live, or was just streamed live, between the Democrats who want your vote next Tuesday, April 30th. There were a few angry exchanges between Ed Markey and Stephen Lynch during this very lively debate. Lynch insisted that Markey voted no on Homeland Security legislation. Markey angrily took exception, saying that Steve Lynch was taking a page out of Republican strategist Karl Rove's playbook to swift-boat John Kerry. That was back in 2004. Lynch said that he was taking pages out of Ed Markey's voting record. The other notable point there was Ed Markey voted for Obama's health care bill. Steve Lynch voted against it, saying it was inadequate. We will highlight this debate for you tonight on 22 News at 11, and of course it is online at WWLP. I'm Barry Krieger. We'll see you back here on 22 News at 11 o'clock.